residents pay taxes, serve in the military, can see the Capitol from their apartments, but still can't vote in Congress. Let's talk about H.R. 51. Welcome back to Beyond the Bill Number, the show where we turn legislation into conversation and occasionally a mild identity crisis. Today's bill? Oh, you know, just the one that decides whether 700,000 Americans should finally get the representation they've been paying taxes for since Hamilton had a ponytail. We're talking H.R. 51, the Washington, D.C. Admission Act, the bill with more historical baggage than the Library of Congress basement. Stephen, are you ready to dive into the constitutional deep end?
As ready as Congress is to argue about something for the 51st time. Let's do it.
Okay, so before we unpack this intensely maddening, never-ending bill that we talk about, see all the time,
Crazy.
Let's talk about the UK's conquering, because I'm very interested how other places that have these types of random offshoots of land and people that aren't necessarily part of the government handle that. We have DC, which is definitely part of the United States, but then we also have places like Puerto Rico and Guam, which can vote for president, but they don't have representation in Congress, and it's a messy area there. So, from the messiest nation of them all in this area, what do you guys do?
Yeah, well, so this, most countries, unlike America, weren't designed. You were lucky that you did actually have the founding fathers and they sat down, they drew up a document. And then if you look at a map of the US, it's all nice straight lines and things. People have drawn stuff on it. Most countries don't evolve in that way. And Britain, the UK, certainly didn't. Britain was put together over many thousands of years of conquest and this and that and the other, and we'll have that and we'll give it back and we don't want that. So actually the United Kingdom is a bit of a mess. And as you say, we have a lot of what we tend to call overseas territories. But then, as you mentioned, so does the US. You know, I've only been around for a few years, but you've managed to go out and meddle in plenty of other countries at the time. Probably the most famous ones are the Falkland Islands, where, of course, back in the 80s, we fought a war with Argentina because they had the temerity to invade this island that's just next to where their own country is. And we went back to kick them out. And then the other one, of course, is Gibraltar, which is weirdly just off the tip of Spain. So why is Gibraltar British? Well, long historical precedent going back. But both of these do have their own government, but obviously they are also beholden to the United Kingdom. But then, of course, the United Kingdom itself is a united group of kingdoms. So you have England, then you have Wales. Wales joined in like the 1200s, so they've been around for quite a while. Then you have Scotland, of course, and we've spent a good 1,000 years or more fighting them on and off and invading and going back and forth until eventually we had the Act of Union, where they also joined. And then, of course, you've got Northern Ireland, and the Northern Ireland bit is far too complex to even talk about because there's a lot of history there going back many, many centuries, lots of fighting, lots of blood. But the current situation, which was actually only formed in the 1990s, is that each of those countries do have their own government and they have a variety of different powers. So Scotland, for example, can levy taxes. Wales can't. Northern Ireland has this assembly, but is still sort of more beholden to the United Kingdom. And when it doesn't work, they are actually for quite a period now, they've been managed directly from London. And so a very, very complicated sort of constitutional arrangement. But what we don't have is a part of the country which it doesn't exist in a proper way, where the people there don't get to vote for representation, because that's insane. Wherever they are, everybody votes for some kind of representation. In Northern Ireland, of course, if you vote for Sinn Féin, then members of parliament that are elected don't actually take up their seats as a protest about the fact that Northern Ireland isn't part of the rest of Ireland. But at least you do get to vote for them. This crazy situation where you've got 700,000 people who just don't have the proper representation that everybody else in the United States does is crazy.
They have representation in a way that a lot of states don't, with an NHL and an NFL team. So I don't know why they can't just be in Congress.
Yeah, I mean that's obviously the defining characteristic, isn't it? If they've got an NFL team, then they should definitely get to vote.
Absolutely. NHL gets a little bit into Canada being the 51st state, but here we are.
Yes.
Okay, well, yes, this is crazy. Let's get into it. So let's start with the therapy portion of today. Why is Washington, D.C. like this? Walk us through the origin story and how we ended up with our capital city full of Americans who don't get voting representation.
Yes, it's as I say, very, very weird situation. So DC didn't just wake up one day without voting rights. Congress very intentionally took away those rights. So it all started with Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, where the framers gave Congress powers to create a federal district. Then comes the Residence Act of 1790, which drew that district along the Potomac and pulled residents outside any state's jurisdiction. You can then fast forward to 1801, where Congress passed the Organic Act, which is a great name for an act, which formally takes control of this new district and strips citizens of representation in Congress. Boom, taxation, no representation, and not even the bumper sticker yet. And DC actually couldn't even vote for president until 1961, thanks to the 23rd Amendment. And they didn't get local home rule until 1973. And even that came with an asterisk because, as anybody who tracks DC bills in Bill Track 50 will know, Congress has a veto over any laws that the DC City Council actually passes.
It is crazy over there. So basically, Congress just said, we'll take your rivers, your monuments, and your payroll taxes, but not your congressional delegation. Okay, so let's talk about the main event. For people who think HR 51 is just kind of a vibes-based request to put a shiny new star on the flag, what does this bill actually do?
Well, HR 51 is unusual for these types of bills. We should say that these kind of bills come around every single Congress and have done for many, many years. Probably going all the way back to 1973, I would think. But HR 51 is a very actionable and very structured attempt to solve this problem. So, first, it would admit a new state, the 51st state. The new state would be called Washington Douglas Commonwealth, named, of course, after Frederick Douglass, the famed 19th century civil rights activist. The new state would include all residential and commercial areas of today's district. Then it leaves behind a tiny, strictly federal enclave containing the White House, the Capitol, the Supreme Court, the National Mall, etc. And that enclave would stay under direct congressional control, satisfying the Constitution's requirements for a federal district. You cannot just get rid of DC. It's in the Constitution. You would need to change the Constitution. So this bill, obviously handily called HR 51 for the 51st state, would also direct the president to issue a proclamation once DC elects 2 senators and 1 representative. Get 1 representative in the House. It would create a Statehood Transition Commission, which would sort out, all the courts, the contracts, the agencies, all of that bureaucratic decluttering that would be needed to create this new state. It would also ensure continuity of all local laws and institutions, so they wouldn't have to start passing all the laws again. And most importantly, it would set up a process to repeal that pesky 23rd Amendment, because otherwise that tiny capital enclave that would be left over would still have 3 electoral college votes. So imagine you'd have the first family electing the president, potentially. It's the political version of letting your Sims control city council.
Oh no, can't let the Sims be in charge of anything.
No. You know what they get up to.
Okay, so this is funny to an extent, but it's also horrifying. There's just so many people that are not being represented, that are doing so much for the nation because they all live there. So that's crazy. All right. Constitution nerds, gather round. Stephen, the skeptics say that HR 51 is unconstitutional. Supporters say it's totally constitutional. And I say someone is definitely cherry picking here. So let's break down the constitutional fight.
Okay, sure. In a nutshell, I think both are cherry picking, to be honest. And obviously, were this ever to happen, it would be up to the Supreme Court to decide, and it'd be interesting to see which way they would go. But okay, let's have a look at this then. So buckle up. It's basically a choose your own precedent situation. So the supporters lean on the following evidence: the admissions clause, Article 4, Section 3 of the Constitution, which Congress has used 37 times in the past to admit new states, so a bit of a precedent there. The fact that the Constitution sets only a maximum size for the federal district, not a minimum, so they therefore feel that it's perfectly okay to shrink it down, not get rid of it altogether. And then the historical precedent of 1847 retrocession, when Congress returned parts of DC to Virginia.
Okay.
So their argument, shrinking the federal district is allowed, and the rest can become a state. Fine. The opponents, of course, disagree with all of that, and they would say the framers intentionally created a neutral federal district, so turning it into a state violates the intent of the Constitution and is therefore unconstitutional. And you can't bypass it without a constitutional amendment. So they say, fine, do it, but get your constitutional amendment first, because they know that would never happen. And the 23rd Amendment, of course, creates chaos unless it's repealed. Again, a very, very difficult thing to do, because this new micro district, as we've already said, could end up controlling 3 electoral votes and therefore potentially holding the balance in a very, very tight presidential election. Zach Smith from the Heritage Foundation basically says giving DC congressional power is precisely what Madison warned against in Federalist 43, concentrated influence too close to the seat of government.
Okay, so both sides are basically holding the Constitution like a fortune cookie and reading whatever message they want. Mm-hmm. I want to talk about the politics of this now because, oof, so much of this debate is constitutional theory on the surface and raw math underneath. How does H.R. 51 reshape the political landscape?
Well, were it to pass, this is the part where everybody suddenly remembers how to count. So statehood would almost certainly add 2 Democratic senators. As everyone knows, DC predominantly Democrat, so therefore it's likely that this new state would have 2 Democratic senators and 1 Democratic representative. So the impact on the House then wouldn't be enormous. I mean, we've already spoken about the various redistricting that's going on to give one party or the other an extra sort of representative there. But the crucial thing is these 2 senators. Given how tight the Senate usually is in these days, this is like handing one side a weighted blanket and the other side a caffeine detox. Democrats therefore frame H.R. 51 as civil rights and democracy, the unfinished business of the 1960s. Republicans call it a partisan power grab. Both narratives are oversimplified, of course, but the math is very, very real. Local statehood would also give the new state control over, of course, its National Guard, its criminal justice system, its budget, and its social policies from reproductive rights to cannabis. And everybody will be well aware of the various ructions in DC recently with the National Guard there and what is seen very much as federal sort of overreach in terms of policing and so on. So very, very much a current issue, really. Congress would lose its ability to override local laws, which it doesn't do very often, but it does do, and it's done recently with some quite important ones to do with sort of voting rights and things. And supporters say this, of course, is liberation, allowing people who live in DC to actually decide what their laws should be. But opponents would say it's letting DC be DC unsupervised. It needs a chaperone.
And interesting that that's the only location in the US that needs a chaperone.
Absolutely.
Okay, so in short, depending on who you ask, H.R. 51 is either democracy's redemption arc or the villain origin story.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, so Stephen, let's destroy dreams in under 30 seconds. What are H.R. 51's chances?
Well, about the same as a snowball's chance in July on the National Mall. This bill has been introduced in various different versions over years, and it keeps clearing the House. That part's fairly easy, but the Senate still has the filibuster. And unless 60 senators get a sudden change of heart or Republican senators have a sudden lack of career ambition, H.R. 51 ain't moving. It functions much more as a declaration of intent. We believe this should happen, even if it can't happen right now.
Like me declaring that I'm gonna start cardio.
Yes.
Okay, so to sum it up, DC residents can see Congress from their windows. They pay all these federal taxes. They serve in the military. They do all these things that states do. They have the NFL. They have the NHL. They are part of our society, except they actually have no vote in the body that's governing them, that many of them work for and are driving for.
Mm-hmm. That's
okay,
right.
Well, H.R. 51 is more than a bill. It's a question about who gets to belong, which I think is a question that is happening everywhere in the U.S. and the world right now. So, Stephen, thanks for walking us through centuries of constitutional weirdness.
Always happy to talk about the only city where the potholes have more representation than the people.
And that is our show. You can read the full blog and track every bill that we discuss on BillTrack50.com. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and share, especially with that one friend who insists that DC is basically a state already. See you next time on Beyond the Bill Number.